I think the limit is our imagination, right? With what a subnet can do. I like to use the example that a subnet is kind of like sustaining plasma and nuclear fusion or getting into Bittensor. There's three big barriers. One of them is Bittensor native developers. The second is the registration fee to get on mainnet, right? And third is the political side of Bittensor. Our goal is to get companies live to mainnet within 60 to 90 days. Starts with kind of a brainstorming session where we get our technical team in with their technical team to throw some ideas at the wall around incentive mechanism and kind of subnet design. If we can find a if we can find a valuable kind of incentive mechanism or subnet structure or some digital commodity, then we'll kind of take things to the next phase, write the white paper, get everything in order from the registration process to the full subnet architecture. I would say from day one, we are truly co-development partners here. It's not like we're just kind of supporting from the wings. We're definitely working on a daily basis with these teams. And then once the subnet's ready, getting your companies out on a media tour. So getting them on a novelty search, getting them on the Ventura podcast.
Welcome to the Ventura Labs podcast. Today, we're joined by Mike Grantis, managing partner at Contango Digital Assets, who shares his insight on accelerating the adoption of decentralized systems, particularly at the intersection of blockchain and artificial intelligence. We'll be discussing Contango's mission to drive blockchain innovation, the discovery of Bittensor, and the work of General Tao Ventures. Our conversation will cover the complexities of decentralized technologies, the importance of subnet design, and the evolving landscape of blockchain and AI, as well as Mike's vision for the future of AI, the potential for AGI, and the emerging roles of AI agents. And now, to Mike with the 16th Ventura Labs podcast.
What is Contango Digital Assets and what is your role with them?
So Contango Digital Assets, first and foremost, is a venture capital firm. I'm one of the managing partners here. And we were founded June of 2021, essentially to accelerate the adoption of decentralized systems. We invest in early stage blockchain projects working at the intersection of blockchain and AI. So we have a $10 million seed fund in which we are deploying right now into kind of up and coming projects that are kind of building at that intersection.
You guys are exclusively blockchain and AI?
Yeah. So, I mean, when we first launched, we were more broad spectrum Web3. And then eventually we, alongside our mission to kind of accelerate the adoption of decentralized systems, we decided, well, there's probably nothing more important to decentralize than AI. And we took a look around and we saw the way that AI was developing in these kind of centralized siloed companies, OpenAI and Google and, Amazon, Anthropic. Like there was not a lot of kind of open source decentralized AI being built. And so we figured that was probably one of the most pressing places that we could focus our attention. So yes, we are very, very much focused at that intersection today.
Okay. And you guys are a VC fund, but you guys, I guess, try to be a little more hands-on, I think. So you do like advisory services, help launch, support, stuff like that. So how do you guys differentiate yourself from other venture capital firms or funds?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a lot of VCs will give you kind of the spiel of their value add. Hey, we can introduce you to other investors, or hey, we can help you with tokenomics, or we can help you with launch and market makers and centralized exchanges for listings. I feel like most VCs have a very similar playbook. But I think what separates the good VCs from the great VCs is actually working hands-on in the projects or in the protocols that they're investing in. Whether that's setting up infrastructure, running nodes, whether that's, building projects or even kind of funding projects in specific ecosystems that you've invested in. Really trying to take an active, pragmatic approach to building is something that we've really tried to steer our focus towards. You could take a look at our website, Contango.digital, and you'll see a bunch of testimonials there. But I think like the real, the value that we provide is kind of being ready and on call whenever a founder needs us. We've done a lot of work in building out subnets and kind of, closing investment rounds for teams, or really just helping out with kind of launch and advisory and tokenomics, like, the kind of broad spectrum things that most VCs say. But I think really what we try and do is just swing above our weight. We're a small fund. We know we don't have all the resources of kind of the big tier 1 billion-dollar funds, but what we do have is, conviction in our thesis and conviction in the projects that we invest in, and a real drive to support those projects and go into market.
You mentioned your website. Your website says your mission is to accelerate the global movement towards decentralized technology, right? What does this mean? What does this mean for you guys?
I mean, it's a big question, and it's a big kind of mission. But I think essentially the way we see it is decentralization is probably one of the best ways to ensure a benevolent future. And in the space of AI, it's probably one of the best ways to ensure a benevolent, general intelligence, right? Is to take inputs from all the people. You look at the way countries are founded or democracies are founded, and, decentralization is what brings power back to the people. One voice, one vote, right? Having the ability to have your say heard, and having governance over your own decisions. Like, decentralization is through blockchain is a new technology that is allowing us to distribute, resources, distribute power, and distribute kind of decision-making autonomy back to the people. And we think that's extremely important, moving forward as a civilization, because, we don't want all the power being held in the hands of the few. That seems very Orwellian to us.
Okay. So it's giving the power back to the people. That self-governance is the...
Absolutely.
Okay. And then you said you guys are like shifting towards more focus to AI and blockchain. When did you guys decide to make that shift? When did the mindset shift there?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I've been interested in this intersection for quite some time, probably since 2018. And I was always, focused on what was next in technology. And so, I mean, I was a little bit of a late bloomer to Bitcoin in 2016, but was always a fan of artificial intelligence. And I watched a documentary called The Transcendent Man on Ray Kurzweil. This was, I don't know, about a decade ago. And there was this guy with this, a cow print hat. Turns out it was Ben Goertzel, who's kind of one of the, I guess, founding fathers of AI. He's been, an AI researcher for 30 plus years, has 18 published, books, and kind of went down the rabbit hole looking into some of his works. And one day realized in 2018 that he was launching a token, which kind of merged these two worlds, like where I was, getting interested in Bitcoin, but then also in 2018 started to get interested in this kind of intersection and what that could mean. And I think, one of the things I realized very early on is that this is an intersection that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of people, from the outside looking in, would look at these two industries as parallel industries. And what, I think we kind of realized earlier than most is that there's a convergence that's happening, quicker than most people would believe in this space. So we got introduced to Ben. We got introduced to the SingularityNet Foundation. We made an investment in in SingularityNet and started doing some angel investing in some of the spin-off projects that were coming out of the SingularityNet ecosystem, and really started to kind of build this conviction in our thesis that way. And yeah, so I think it was kind of like a serendipitous, right place, right time. And candidly, we were a bit early on this kind of blockchain AI investment thesis because it didn't really pan until 2021, or I guess 2023 really, when ChatGPT came out and the entire market started to get heated. But I think what we've done is taken a really pragmatic approach, and taking a very pointed approach. And I think in the venture capital game, you have to have specialization, and you have to be willing to kind of put your money where your mouth is and believe in the thesis that you're promoting, right? And I think we're very much down that road, and we very much think we kind of hit the right space at the right time. And not only is it probably going to make some good economic sense, but also is probably going to be philosophically where we want to be focusing our attention.
You said you got into the blockchain AI space in 2018, and your first project was SingularityNet. So how did you find Bittensor, and what was your first impression of Bittensor?
Yeah, well, I mean, so the original promise of SingularityNet, and I don't want to offend anybody saying this, but like the original promise of SingularityNet was to have almost like kind of this, what would resemble a brain, and kind of like you'd have these synapses and you'd have these neurons firing and wiring together, and you would have different AI agents that were sharing reputation, information, and value, right? And this would all be kind of orchestrated on chain. And the original kind of manifestation of that was a marketplace where you could try and tune different forms of AI. But candidly, I don't know if they ever reached that stated objective. And kind of middle of 2023, one of our investors kind of was shilling Bittensor a little bit, and I kind of took a look through the white paper and realized, hey, this actually has the potential to do kind of what some of those things that SingularityNet really set out to do in the early days. And I saw a lot of similarities with kind of the Bittensor white paper and the Bitcoin white paper, and loved the branding and loved kind of the kind of minimalistic approach and non-prescriptive approach, because Bittensor is what you make it, and it has so many possibilities, can go down so many roads and do so many different things. I really liked that they were non-prescriptive about what it was, and kind of, it was one of those Bitcoin moments where you start reading the white paper, you fall down the rabbit hole, and you wake up a week later and you realize you've taken in all the content you possibly can. So it was one of those almost like aha moments, like light bulb moments, where you kind of you find something. We see thousands of projects all the time, and see pitch decks all the time, but it was one of those projects that really kind of hit me as like, wow, this is game-changing technology. And so decided very quickly that we wanted to build a business around it. And it was probably a bigger opportunity than just an investment in our fund, or, kind of putting in a small angel ticket. It was more, or individual liquid investment. We wanted to build a business because we saw, given how early it was, and, how strong the emissions are pre-first halving, we wanted to be able to get in and, put our weight into the ecosystem in that way. So it was mid 2023 that we got interested. It was probably end of 2023 that we actually decided to build a business around it. And it was, all of 2024 that we've spent kind of shepherding some of our portfolio companies into Bittensor, working with validators, and really trying to make a name for ourselves in the ecosystem.
So you got involved mid 2023 and then decided to build a business in Bittensor by the end of 2023. What made you develop that level of conviction in Bittensor?
Well, I saw a lot of parallels with Bitcoin, and the economics, 21 million, 4-year halving, fair launch, kind of no VC overhangs and unlocks. Made a lot of sense from an economic perspective, right? Like we saw what happened with Bitcoin. And I think what the real aha moment was for me was that Bitcoin proved to the world that decentralized compute scales much faster than centralized compute. So to put it into perspective, the Bitcoin network is the largest supercomputer on Earth by 500 times, 500 times bigger than the second largest supercomputer. And it's only been around for what, 15 years, 16 years maybe? So what it showed is that it can aggregate all this compute from all over the world because it takes the path of least resistance. Anybody that has electricity and has access to compute can plug it into the network, and you can kind of aggregate all that compute. But the issue, or I guess, one of the critiques would be that all of that computing power in Bitcoin doesn't really do anything that's useful in the real world. It mines arbitrary hashes or does like math problems, and objectively just doesn't have any real world value other than securing Bitcoin, which has a ton of value. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big Bitcoin believer, but that compute isn't doing anything that's useful outside of securing the chain. Whereas this kind of unlock or this aha with Bittensor was that, hey, if decentralized compute scales much faster than centralized compute, what if we used that compute for useful work as opposed to just proof of work? And so that useful work could be generative AI, it could be text generation or sports predictions or protein folding or whatever it might be that takes a lot of compute could be done with all the compute that's aggregated in this network. And then, we got interested kind of pre-Subnets, but when Subnets launched, then that was kind of the big aha moment because, Bitcoin scales with Metcalfe's law. With every new node, the value grows exponentially. With Bittensor, if you have subnets, so you have networks inside of networks, the value should hypothetically scale based on Reed's law, which is kind of like 2 to the n nodes. So it scales even exponentially faster than Metcalfe's law. And when all of those subnets can communicate and share value and, share information, that's when you get to kind of like the makings of what looks like artificial general intelligence. And I truly believe that artificial general intelligence will first happen in this kind of space of the intersection of blockchain and AI. And there's a couple of reasons for that we could probably talk about for hours.
So what is the official investment thesis in Bittensor for you and your fund?
So the fund, I would have to say, is not specific to Bittensor. We're broad spectrum across the blockchain AI landscape. The fund, it's a $10 million seed fund. We're investing at the intersection of blockchain and AI and North American companies that are building in that space. But the way that we break down our fund investments is kind of in 4 buckets. So you have kind of like your compute or infrastructure layer on the bottom. You have data and inference. So you have kind of data protocols and you have inference protocols, and then you have applications that sit on top of all of that. And because this AI kind of arms race is so early, we don't know exactly where the value is going to accrue in that space. So we want to make sure that we have bets in all 4 of those quadrants. I think there are lots of applications that span, either all 4 or span, a few of those different quadrants, but that's kind of the way that we've broken it down, and that's the way we're thinking about it. With respect to Bittensor, when we first launched General Tao Ventures, we didn't actually know what the business was going to do. We just knew that, hey, we wanted to get into the space and we wanted to figure out ways that we could be active participants in Bittensor. And then what we quickly, realized is that we have this proprietary top of funnel with, 25, 26 portfolio companies in our blockchain AI fund that could easily utilize or create value for both Bittensor, and Bittensor could create value for their businesses. And so we realized, hey, let's start shepherding some of our portfolio companies into Bittensor. And so thus far, 7 of our portfolio companies in the fund have launched a total of 8 subnets on Bittensor. We haven't incubated all of them. Some of them we've introduced to Bittensor. Some of them have found Bittensor on their own. But we've actually incubated through General Tao Ventures 3 subnets now, Subnet 35, Subnet 23, and Subnet 61, which just came online, Red Team. And so the idea there is these AI companies, they have great development talent. We have hired some Bittensor specific developers on our team. We'll kind of come together, we'll bring the Bittensor devs that can work on incentive design and subnet architecture, and then we'll bring a few devs from those portfolio company teams, and co-develop these subnets with them, right? And then kind of take a share of the emissions. That's the business model there. And I think generally speaking, there are a few big barriers to entry into getting into Bittensor, right? Specifically for our portfolio companies, and these are kind of things that we've realized over time. So I think there's 3 big barriers. One of them is Bittensor native developers, right? Because it's such a new ecosystem, finding Bittensor devs that have experience but aren't working on their own projects is kind of like finding a needle in a haystack. And they have to be, super smart, super talented in order to be able to make these incentive mechanisms work. The second is the registration fee to get on mainnet, right? Hovering between 3,000 and 2,000 Tau, like that's a pretty restrictive amount of capital for any startup. And so you need registration fee partners in order to kind of make those make that investment to get you to mainnet. And then third is, I guess, kind of the political side of Bittensor, right? So we're still in a pre-DTAO world, and you still need to have relationships with validators, and you still need to come on podcasts like this to get your name heard. And so one thing that we pride ourselves on is we've got great relationships with most of the top 10 validators, if not all of them. And, we've got great relationships with yourself, Grant, and, some of the other podcasts in the space. So we can help kind of get companies on a bit of a media tour before they launch their subnets and, kind of share their value to the world. So that's kind of like where we see value in bringing companies into Bittensor. The other side of the equation is, what do those companies get in return, right? And the easy answer is that, hey, they earn emissions, and there's a revenue component to earning emissions. But I guess what most people don't see is that you can actually offload a big portion of your research and development for some of these companies to Bittensor miners, right? Like, just speaking about Red Team, which is the one we just launched, Subnet 61, essentially what they did is they kind of inverted the incentive mechanism to create this adversarial environment where miners are trying to essentially create bot attacks that are bypassing their bot and fraud detection models, right? So you're getting miners to attack your models in order to keep retraining those models with new attack vectors that are always new and up to date in the marketplace. So the team behind Red Team, Interworks, is a fraud and bot detection platform that are used across multiple payment rails, and they secure Web3 companies for airdrops and things of the sort. But what they found is that this, the big companies like Cloudflare or that protect from bots simply aren't cutting it because they don't have this real-time feedback loop with new attack vectors that are updating models that are essentially protecting from new attacks that are kind of always increasing in the market, right? So Bittensor for Interworks has proven that it will prove to be one of their research and development pipelines to continuously make their product better. And so that is kind of a big aha moment for portfolio companies too, realizing, hey, we can actually get the Bittensor mining community to continue to improve, our own products, and then, in return, open source those products that can be used for the rest of the community. So it's a good feedback loop for both, companies coming in and then also kind of the business model for General Tao Ventures.
And that's Red Team Subnet 61 that just launched or just announced today.
Yep.
Yeah. And you said General Tao Ventures. That is Contango's Bittensor arm. It's like a subnet incubator funnel for Contango portfolio companies. Is it open to anyone? What are you guys doing with General Tao Ventures?
Yeah, so it is a subsidiary company of Contango, very, very closely related to Contango. I would say most of the companies that we've brought into the ecosystem have been portfolio companies of the fund. That doesn't mean we're restricted to only working with companies that we've invested in through the fund. So we get pitched, on a daily basis with new subnet ideas, and some of them are great, some of them, don't work. But really, I would call us a venture studio, because we do, it's less of kind of just a short form incubation project and more of like a co-development. You're building a business in collaboration with these teams, and it doesn't end after a 4-week stint. It's it's kind of an ongoing process where you have to keep kind of scaling up your teams to work across these different subnets. So we are a venture studio, a subsidiary of Contango. We work very closely with the Contango portfolio companies, but doesn't mean we're restricted to that. We also have a very close relationship with Roundtable 21, one of the kind of largest and most reputable validators in the ecosystem. They're investors in our fund, and they're investors in General Tao Ventures as well. And we've just got we love Adam, and we love what he stands for in the community, which is kind of trust and reputation and doing the right thing. So we've got a very close relationship with him. He's been very helpful in kind of supporting our subnets, but also supporting the ecosystem from day one. And he's running some infrastructure for our other portfolio companies outside of Bittensor too, and we're just continuing to build that relationship together. So it's good to have both sides of the coin, especially in a post DTAO world. To have some support from those big validators is definitely important.
So as a venture studio, how does GTV, General Tao Ventures, what does that incubation process look like for these subnets that you are helping incubating?
Yeah, so I mean, to take you through the whole process, our goal is to get companies live to mainnet within 60 to 90 days. That's from kind of ideation to inception with 60 to 90 days. Now, starts with kind of a brainstorming session where we get our technical team in with their technical team, start to throw some ideas at the wall around incentive mechanism and kind of subnet design. What exactly is the objective function we're looking to achieve with the subnet? And actually, the other side of that is how does that subnet actually affect or support their business, their core business that we've invested in, right? So if we can find a if we can find a valuable kind of incentive mechanism or subnet structure, or some digital commodity that we want to be mined through the subnet, Then we'll kind of take things to the next phase. We'll start kind of, weekly or twice a week calls with development teams. We'll write the white paper. We'll get kind of everything in order from the registration process to the kind of full subnet architecture. I would say from day one we are truly co-development partners here. It's not like we're just kind of supporting from the wings. We're definitely working on a daily basis with these teams. And then, once the subnet's ready, you've got to get your registrations in order, and you're looking for the right time to register. And then you're getting your companies out on a media tour. So getting them on a novelty search, getting them on the Ventura podcast, getting them on Tao Talk, and introducing them to some of the bigger validators in the space. And kind of, we all know the drill of the little road tour that it has to be done, at least in these days. So just kind of 360 view is getting them up and running live within 60 to 90 days.
Yeah, it's a pretty comprehensive process there. And working with Adam, Roundtable 21, that probably helps you a lot with incentive design and knowing what type of subnet works or doesn't work. How do you view different types of subnets? Are there any types of businesses that are better fit to be subnets on Bittensor that's easier to design an incentive mechanism for? Have you noticed anything there? Because y'all subnets are quite diverse in what they do.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think the limit is our imagination, right? With what a subnet can do. I like to use the example that a subnet is kind of like sustaining plasma and nuclear fusion, right? All you're trying to do is specifically force computers to do one thing objectively well. And all of these computers are adversarial, and they're all trying to get out and beat the system in different ways. And there's all these attack vectors. And your goal as a subnet designer is really to try and hone all those things in and compress this kind of concentrated plasma and keep this reaction going as long as possible without it getting gamed. So it doesn't really matter exactly what that objective function is. The real question is, how is this going to be gamed in an adversarial environment, and how can you protect yourself against that? And that's where Adam actually really comes in, is he looks at things from a validation perspective, and he knows, hey, if subnet owners have unfair access to information, or they have they understand this is going to happen before the general public, then that's going to create, an adversarial relationship with their miners, right? Because miners are never going to be, as good as the subnet owners at mining their own subnet. And so you have to really think through where the attack vectors are, not only for miners to attack, but like the subnet owners, if they wanted to mine their own subnet, how would they attack the other miners? So it's less a question of, hey, what are the right things to build on Bittensor, and more of what is the right way to build a subnet so it stands the test of time? And I think candidly, that's still open. Those are still open questions, right? We are still very new, and the state of play with subnets is getting better and better every single day, it seems. So we're going to continue to see probably a progression in the quality of these subnets, and new incentive designs are going to be adopted by other subnets, and there's going to be this kind of cross-pollination of new value, like with any open source ecosystem. So the goal is really just to keep ahead of the curve and stay up to date with everything that's going on, which, as you and I both know, is easier said than done.
Yeah, there's a lot of innovation happening at a very rapid pace in Bittensor. And Jake said Q1 details coming, and that I can only imagine will increase the pace of innovation. What are your thoughts on detail?
This is a deep topic. One, I mean, I hope it comes in Q1. I think I think we're ready to shake things up a little bit. It's going to be a massive experiment, and it's going to be very adversarial. It's going to be very P2P. I think one thing I would say is there's you definitely don't want to risk everything in detail. You always want to hold some Tao, right? Not financial advice, but you always want to hold some Tao. You participate with the things that you're willing to risk, but you don't want to risk your whole bag because it's going to be an adversarial environment. Right. I think one thing that's hopefully going to help is it's going to be a less political game, and it's going to be a more market driven game. So you aren't going to have these kind of oligarchs or overlords that own the biggest validators that are kind of the get to decide who makes money and who doesn't. It's going to be up to the subnets to figure out how they can rally their communities around their tokens and where you can actually bring value to your token. So, DTAO flips a lot of things on its head where, you actually have to have an economic model around your own token in order to make it successful. So I think there's going to be a lot of subnets that are going to have to rejig their strategy on this. But the other thing that, I don't know how many people have thought about, I know the Manifold and Macrocosmos guys are definitely deep in the weeds here, but is exactly how adversarial the mining game is going to be in a detail world, right? Like you can think of a world in which more than 51% of your mining slots get taken up by adversarial miners, and they're consistently dumping your tokens and buying their own tokens back, and you're using this as this kind of arbitrage, almost reverse takeover type deal. And it's going to be the way that I've heard Rob describe it is you're going to have it's like all these subnets are going to be going to war, and you're going to have frontline miners that are protecting your subnet from adversarial subnet miners coming in. And it's going to be a wild, wild west for sure. I do think it's going to be a massive net positive for Bittensor. I think it's going to be a net positive probably for price action because subnet owners can't just dump global Tao anymore. They're going to have to support the price of their own subnet, or else they're sabotaging themselves. So there's going to be a lot less subnet owner sell pressure and probably some less miner sell pressure. I think a big difference is subnet owners are definitely going to have to get into the mining game if they're not already. It might be kind of frowned upon for subnet owners to mine their own subnets now. I don't know if that's still the case, but they're definitely going to have to mine their own subnet in order to kind of support their own token price come DTAO world. So there's going to have to be this union of the three parts of the business, like invalidators, subnet owners, and miners. You're going to have to create businesses that in some way touch all three of those constituents in order to be successful. And I think part of the value of General Tao Ventures is bringing a number of subnets under the same umbrella to make sure that, we're better together and stronger together, sharing resources, sharing development talent, sharing mining operations, sharing value and information as much as we can to make sure that the kind of entirety of our tent all rises together. So I think it's going to be a crazy experiment. There's going to be, a lot of shakeups, but I think net it is definitely positive for the ecosystem. And I also think it brings us one step closer to general intelligence, because, these subnet tokens are kind of the direct representation of utility of a subnet. And if you have an agent that can come in and buy and sell and use these subnet tokens, the kind of world is that subnet's or that agent's oyster, right? And so you have to think Bittensor is probably going to be the first playground that any general intelligence would want to come to because it can get them any resource that they want.
That's interesting. A playground for AGI. But before we get into the AGI talk, what are the strategies for bringing value to a subnet token? how do you approach doing that in a detail world?
Well, just like with any kind of Web3 tokenomics, there has to be utility in the token, right? So there has to be some real world value that comes from the that comes from the utility of the token. Maybe that's, in order to use the API of the subnet, you have to lock up some amount of tokens, or you have to stake some amount of tokens. That takes tokens out of circulating supply and hypothetically raises the price. It could be that token is the payment currency for the front end that is built on top of that subnet. So really, it's figuring out, like, not only are you creating subnet design and kind of creating this this incentive mechanism, but you're also creating a tokenomic structure around it that allows utility of that token to continue to push the price. There are different ways that you can do that. There are kind of the easiest cop out in the Web3 world is the buyback and burn. I don't know if that's going to work in detail because all of the tokens are 21 million for your halving. So there's going to be different models that are going to have to, be case fit for every different subnet use case. But I think what we're really going to need to see is revenue generating subnets, revenue generating front ends that utilize that token, that subnet token, to produce an action or produce an output. And the more that token is utilized, so the more valuable that digital commodity is, the more value that subnet token should accrue. There are going to be adversarial actors. There are going to be pump and dumps. There are going to be things that, could be black eyes to the ecosystem. That's always going to happen whenever there's kind of like breakthrough technology. You're always going to have opportunists. You're always going to have kind of charlatans and scammers. But it's kind of state of the nation when you have a new technology. Everybody wants to come join the gold rush. So what I would say to subnet owners is just focus on building real utility around your token. Focus on building a valuable subnet that people want to use, and a front end that people want to use. Figure out how you can monetize that front end, and figure out how the monetization of that front end can filter back into purchasing more tokens and locking up more tokens. It's the best way to kind of sustain long-term success.
Got it. And then you also said something that was interesting. You said subnet owners will probably have to mine their own subnet. Right now, that's, depending on who you ask, is frowned upon because of, maybe they're saying they exploit the code because they write it, or they know they have an informational advantage because they know the changes that will be coming. Why do you think it is important for subnet owners to mine their own subnet in a detail environment?
Well, if you think about the amount of emissions you receive as the kind of the price of your DTAO token, you want to make sure miners aren't coming into your house, mining all of your subnet tokens and dumping them on the market, right? That is like, first and foremost. It's like with any project, you need to find ways to support different price levels. And if you're essentially saying, hey, 81% of my supply is going to go directly to, the majority of the new emissions of the token are going to go directly out to adversarial hands. And we know those adversarial hands are going to dump the token. That's just going to kill the price of my token, and my subnet's going to get deregistered. So it's almost like a line of defense. It would be like a token launching and saying, hey, we're going to give 100% of our tokens to KOLs. And KOLs, like, we all know what they do. They dump, they tend to dump their tokens. And so you just kill the price of your own project. So I think, like, you have to create this, like, almost buffer zone, this barrier where you're actually earning your own token, because you're not an adversarial party, and you're going to be able to stake and hold those tokens. So there's going to be at least some float in your token supply. And I think that's important, both for subnet owners, but also, if you if you're mining, like you need to make sure that you're getting the number of miner slots that is going to allow you to get the output that you need to support your token, right? So yeah, generally, I think you're going to have miners almost as a line of defense as a subnet owner. And if nothing else, it will allow you to kind of soak up some of your own supply so that you know it's not going to be held in adversarial hands and dumped on you when the opportune time happens, right?
Yeah. I would.
Like you think about the other side of that too is like, let's say there's two parties that are going head to head. One party has a mining operation, the other party doesn't, or subnets. Well, what if this one subnet sends all its miners to go mine on this other subnet that's competitive? Like, let's say they're both like generative AI or like, image generation subnets. Well, there's only room for, there's only, that's like this town is only good enough, big enough for one of us. So they send all their miners to this other subnet. They mine all the subnet tokens. They dump them and buy the price of their own. And buy their own subnet. And in turn, they're going to get more emissions from their subnet because they're killing the price of one, pumping the price of the other. It's going to be adversarial. You're just going to have to protect yourself more than you have today.
Yeah, detail will be adversarial for sure. So let's get into the AGI talk. You said it's going to be a playground for AGI, or viewed as a playground for AGI, Bittensor as a whole, the subnets. How does Bittensor contribute to AGI? What's the relationship between AGI and Bittensor in your mind?
So I don't think there's any other project as ambitious as Bittensor that I've seen, candidly. And I think the reason being is, as we kind of talked about in the beginning, it's so non-prescriptive that anybody that has a great idea can go build something extremely useful to the real world on Bittensor. And we have a world right now where we have 64 subnets. Eventually we're going to have 128, and then we're going to have, 1,024, and, so on and so forth. And there's going to be thousands, millions of subnets that are all doing something very specific, very well. And the real unlock is the communication between subnets. I think, think about like single-celled organisms turning into multi-celled organisms, and kind of like this like organic building block of, bigger organisms and bigger organisms until we have like humans and, plants and animals that we have today. Like, I look at these subnets kind of as like single-celled organisms that are very kind of like isolated right now. Some of them connect and talk to each other through APIs, but like, I think when there's communication across multiple subnets, and there's certain subnets that interact more or interplay more with others, like, in the neuroscience, in neuroscience, neurons that fire together wire together, right? And so the more interaction you have between certain synapses, the kind of stronger that connection gets. It's like a information highway. It gets stronger and stronger. Same thing is going to happen with subnets that share information back and forth, or agents that use multiple subnets in conjunction are going to be building these like consortiums of information sharing machines that are just going to continue to get more and more complex. So the subnet, you can really actually think about as like this kind of single-celled organism at the beginning of a genesis of kind of like information explosion. Because once these subnets can all kind of share information, value, and reputation together, they're going to be able to create more and more complex structures on top of that. And agents are going to be able to utilize the resources of all the subnets across the ecosystem to build really, really complex, understandings of the world, and to be able to do things in a really, really, efficient and invaluable way. So maybe that's kind of like more philosophical, but I think like when these subnets all start communicating, then then the network really wakes up. And there's a lot of value to be had here for sure.
What role do you think EVM compatibility plays with this inner subnet communication?
I mean, I think a big one, candidly, I'm not like, I don't know all of the opportunities that it will unlock yet. Just like when Ethereum was created, we didn't know all the types of applications that would be built on top of it. But we knew that it was a kind of a paradigm shift, and it allowed us to do a lot of things that we couldn't previously do. I think EVM, first and foremost, will allow subnet architecture to get much more complex. And as a result of that, will probably lead to better, subnets that are better at achieving their kind of stated objective. It will also allow for chains of information to go from one subnet to another subnet to another based on information of coming from that subnet. So I think it's a big unlock. I just candidly don't know how to value it. I don't know how to I don't know all the things that it's going to unlock, because candidly I don't think anybody does.
Yeah, anyone that claims they know everything that's possible on Bittensor, that's impossible to know. So with the inner subnet communication coming, practically speaking, what do you think that will look like? Do you think that will look like a chat GPT, like OpenAI type of thing, where there's a model trained on Bittensor with data mined on Bittensor and then inference provided by Bittensor and then a front-end application built on Bittensor? Is that how you envision that? Or is it?
I think that would be an aha moment for the general public, because right now, if you're not like deep in the weeds in Bittensor, it's still very amorphous, right? People don't really know exactly what it is. You can send them websites and you can send them to Corcel and say, hey, this is one application that's built on top of it. Or you can give them kind of like tidbits, but there's nothing that's like fully encompassing, right? I think a big kind of like general public unlock would be an OpenAI type model, right? That, as you said, takes inference and takes compute and takes different model training and pre-training information from multiple subnets and pulls it together in one kind of like beautiful consumer-facing package. That would be like, okay, I get it, right? At the same time, I don't think people really need to know what's happening underneath the hood in Bittensor. Just like you don't really need to know what's happening underneath the hood when you send an email or when you go to a website. If it works, it works. And I think generally people are just going to want to see something that works. And hey, maybe in the back of their mind, they know, oh, okay, well, OpenAI is centralized. It's owned by Sam Altman, and Bittensor is owned by everybody, right? And, I could buy a piece of Bittensor, and I probably can't buy a piece of OpenAI anytime soon. So, like, there are those kind of like, do you really need to get into the weeds with people about subnet design and, inter-subnet communication? Or do you want to just tell them, hey, you can build really, really cool, efficient things on top of this kind of new technology and just watch it work, right? And I think like product demos are really the best at selling people. And if you can build really elegant products on top of Bittensor, which, if they're not already here, they're definitely coming. That's going to speak for itself. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
That's my sense.
What excites you the most about blockchain and AI coming together? What do you think is the most exciting possibility in that realm, or because of this new technology, this new field that has arisen?
Mm-hmm. Well, the way I always say it is like, blockchains need intelligence and AI needs trust and incentive, right? So the unlock that blockchain brings to AI is that it allows, one, the transfer of communication, information, reputation, value at the speed of the internet. So on-chain rails. It also allows for the sharing of sharing of reputation amongst other agents. But I think like the big unlock of blockchain is, agents in a Web 2 world aren't going to have bank accounts. They're not going to have Swift codes. They're not going to be like transacting with the current, fiat money system. They need a payment currency that's native to the rails that they operate on. They need something that's super low latency, moves at the speed of light, very low cost to transact, because agents are going to transact hundreds or thousands of times more than humans transact. So you need to have something super low cost, low friction, highly efficient, and blockchain payment rails allow for that for agents. So it'll allow agents to become economic citizens as well. So I think that's one of the big kind of unlocks of the intersection. I think also like just generally blockchain is pretty dumb. Like blockchains don't really have like think for themselves. You have smart contracts, but they're very like rigid and non-malleable. And I think if you have like a level of intelligence operating on top of the blockchain, it makes things a hell of a lot easier, right? Even think of something as trivial as like trading. You want to just probably say in natural language, hey, trade this amount of this when it gets to this price, or sell it if it gets down to this price. Like, just makes things a lot easier to be able to speak to your agents in natural language. So there's definitely crossover. I think one of the big parts that excites me about the ecosystem is like data, user-owned data, particularly. Like, this isn't necessarily Bittensor, but like Vana, for example, which is a portfolio company of ours, is really, I guess, bringing the power back to the people through user-owned data, right? And I think there's going to be a paradigm shift. If it hasn't happened already, it'll probably happen in the next year or so, where people realize Google and Amazon and Meta have made trillions of dollars in market cap on the backs of our data, right? If you're not paying for the product, you are the product, right? As in Google sense. And people know that data has value, but they don't know, and they've never been able to bring that value home. So like, how much have you ever gotten paid from Facebook? Like, how much have you ever gotten paid from Google? You're not, because they're making the money on the backs of your data. And when you give people the option to reclaim their data and put it into a data DAO where they can then get paid for it every time it's used, either by marketing companies or companies that want to train LLMs, then you kind of get this paradigm shift where, hey, like, who else is using my data? And, where else can I monetize my own data? And I think we're going to really start to see this explosion of interest around, hey, monetizing my own data for myself, as opposed to giving it to these big tech companies to allow them to monetize it for me, and not getting anything in return. So I think like the world of user-owned data is really important, also because we're kind of reaching a limit in training data for LLMs. And the big kind of like breaking of the glass ceiling would be getting all the user-owned data from all of these different websites to train large language models on as well. So we only have one internet, and we've already gone through it multiple times on these training runs for these large language models. Eventually, you're going to need a new source of training data, and that's, I believe, is user-owned data.
Yeah, data is the foundation that AI is built on top of. It's what trains all these models. You talked about AI agents. Would you consider an AI agent to be AGI, since it's like a self-acting organism almost, where you could tell it go trade this way and it will do that by itself without further action?
I wouldn't say an agent is AGI. I could see AGI arising from a consortium of agents all working together. Because, an agent is very good at doing something specific, whether that's scheduling meetings for you or booking flights or, there are different agents for different things. But what could be seen as AGI is a bunch of these agents sharing, like in kind of working in an agent economy, right? Sharing information and value at the speed of light. So it's almost like obfuscated away from us as end users. And you just speak to this like omnipotent, like all-knowing AI, and it just routes to the right agent, does the right thing, brings back the right, information in return. So I don't know. I think we're closer than we think. I wouldn't say necessarily like this whole like Goatsy is definitely not AGI and AI 16Z and all the other kind of AI meme coins, like definitely not AGI, but like I could see it coming from an agentic world where you have a multitude of different agents all working together in the background, obfuscated from the end user.
And you think like the key point of that is the router of saying this is, or it observes, and then it knows where to give it to a specific agent. Like in Bittensor terms, if there was something on top of Bittensor that you send a request to, and it routes to specific subnets depending on what you need.
Yeah, like I think definitely it's kind of like how search took over, was kind of like the biggest platform on the internet, right? Search really just figured out how to route us to the places that we wanted to go to for information. In the same way, you're going to need some sort of search function when a command is given to AI. You're going to need a search function to route it to the right agent or the right subnet or the right place for you to return that value. So I think like routing is very, very important, just like search was very, very important to the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll wrap it up with this here. What advice would you have for investors and when they're evaluating investment opportunities in this crypto Web3 space, since you've been in the space for almost a decade now?
Good question. I'd say follow the smartest people in the room. Like, by no means am I the smartest person in almost any room that I go to. But I would say like follow the really talented, really smart people. And one thing that got me really excited about Bittensor, which was also what got me really excited about Bitcoin, is that some of the smartest people in the room were flocking to that space. Like you saw investment bankers leaving investment banks, and you saw like, really talented developers leaving their jobs at the kind of big tech companies to go build this technology. You saw people like professors from Harvard and Stanford and, all the Ivy League schools starting to learn about this and, do research and like follow the smartest people in the room is probably the best advice I could give you. And if there seems to be fervor and excitement around a certain ecosystem, don't just blindly like kind of accept it or invest because you hear other people are excited. If there's a bunch of people excited about something, it probably is it should imply to you that you should do some more research on what that is and figure out why it's really getting people excited. So pretty common sense stuff.
Absolutely. Mike, it's been a pleasure chatting. Thank you.
Great. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on the show. Thanks for everything that you do.